described as a Trump confidant. I don't know if you like that or not. Do you like being called that?
I think Trump friend is good enough. I don't want to overstate the relationship.
I know you were there with him in the UK.
I'm a member of the enemy of the people. Remember that. I'm a member of the press.
But that's what's strange about this, right? Can anyone get through to him and say, calling us the enemy of the people is dangerous?
Look, I think he's actually used that term before.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think it comes out of emotion, which is he's very angry about the press treatment. You guys haven't given him a moment to breathe. Ever since he was elected, people on this network, on MSNBC, were calling for his impeachment. I think even before he took the oath of office.
Not anchors or reporters. You're talking about guests.
Yeah, but you guys were propelling it and pushing it. And it's been a narrative, like, you know, I look at this narrative, but you never talk about the real narrative. When he inherited that job, Obama had economic growth rates of 1.5%. This past quarter, they're saying it's going to be about 4.4. The president told me in England he thinks it's going to be 4.8. Maybe Kudlow's going to work the numbers for that. But it's a 300% increase in about 18 months. I don't think in history we've ever had anything like this. You guys never talk about any of the positives. So, yes, the president made some missteps.
We have an entire business division that sits right behind you that covers the economy every day.
And they're on at 3 o'clock, and you're on all Sunday morning, and Chris and Anderson are on, blasting him away every night.
You don't think the Russia story is worthy of prime time coverage?
Look, I think the president made some missteps. He admitted he misspoke. But the idea, like I've just heard on your program for the past 40 minutes, this hysterical stuff that he was, Max Boot said that he was colluding in open daylight, you know, that he's engaging in treason. This stuff is just beyond belief that President Kennedy, and I'm sure you like President Kennedy as I did, but when he became president, he withdrew American military support to those patriots landing on the Bay of Pigs. They were slaughtered. They were imprisoned. He did it at the last minute. He gave them no warning. People at the time accused him of betrayal, of treason. Now, that was
it was a stain on his presidency.
Well, and he learned from it and he adjusted. We have a relatively new president who had less political experience than John Kennedy.
But hold on, you're saying he gets credit for the economy, it's going gangbusters, but he's still new at his job?
Yeah, he is new at his job. He's relatively new president. He had for 50 years, he's been a business guy. And you know, as a business guy, Brian, words are not so much as important as the concrete actions of the deal. And I think Donald Trump, my own view of the Putin meeting was that he met with Putin and he was exuberant after that meeting because he came out very magnanimous. He probably got, now I haven't spoken to him about it, my guess is he got huge concessions. The meeting went better than anyone expected. And he thought, you know what, I'm going to be overly nice to this guy and see what happens.
We don't know.
We don't know, but we will see in the next coming months. And
we're going to see Russia interfere in our elections in the coming months.
But I do know this. He's dramatically increasing spending by NATO. He's dramatically increased military spending. He's modernizing the nuclear arsenal. I remember speaking to the president just before he became president. He said we were at a disadvantage to Russia. He did not want to go into meetings with Putin having a weak nuclear arsenal. He's the first president in about 20 years to modernize the nuclear arsenal. This is not a friend of Russia, okay?
Then why did he talk like one?
Because negotiating style. This is from his business career. He's coming in, he's setting. Now, I personally don't agree with that approach.
What you're saying to the audience is just trust us. We'll take care of this. That's what you're saying.
No, I'm saying something a little,
trust.
I'm actually saying something a little different, is just go beyond the words and look at his concrete action. If he was engaging in collusion.
I agree with you that actions matter more than words. His actions on the world stage were disgraceful. Because he stood there and didn't defend us.
Do you believe that he's colluding with Russia?
I wish I could just say no. He's definitely not. That's crazy.
But why
Chris, that's crazy. But I can't say that because he's acting in other ways.
But acting, why would he put people like John Bolton, Mike Pompeo, and Jim Mattis, who are all Russia hawks, in the key security positions, setting the
I think that's a fair point. It's strange that he contradicts his own
I've always felt you're a fair reporter. I know you've recently been sort of accusing the president of all sorts of things. And you know what? I think criticism of his is fine, but just give the other side. You know, at Newsmax, we'll have criticism of the president, but as long as it's on policy issues and not, I have disagreed on his health care plan, for instance, but I think he's done a tremendous job on the economy. He gets zero credit, and
he gets a lot of credit for that.
Where? Where
all
you guys
over the
never
press. We
talk about it on prime time. You don't bring guests to talk on it. When was the last time you had Larry Kudlow on talking about 4.5% growth rates?
Larry Kudlow should do more interviews. I completely agree with you.
All right, well,
these aides should give more interviews.
Hey, Larry, I'm sure would love to be on your show. I'll call him.
Can I ask you about Sinclair briefly? There was some developments this week about the Sinclair Tribune deal. You've been lobbying against the deal, which would expand Sinclair's footprint across the country. I know you spoke with the president about it. Is he the invisible hand overseeing media regulation right now?
I think he's quite the opposite. I don't think there's any evidence he got any medals in the FCC. As you know, that's an independent regulatory agency headed by his appointee, Ajit Pai. And I think Pai did an incredible, remarkable, bipartisan, unanimous, showed a lot of integrity. He effectively rejected the Sinclair deal.
Yeah.
Not because he disliked Sinclair. They were 8 months delayed in the process. They refused to comply to the most basic regulatory rules. The DOJ has yet to approve this merger. And
they were doing some shady stuff. Just to explain to our viewers, they were trying to shed some of the stations, but in ways that looked like they were still going to secretly own the stations. That's essentially the problem.
My conversations with the president, I told him about my opposition because Sinclair would have reached 70% of U.S. homes. And while I don't disagree necessarily with Sinclair's editorial point of view, I did not want to see NBC and ABC and the other big liberal networks owning a reach of 70%. I think it would have been very dangerous if NBC was dictating the local news coverage in Des Moines, Iowa. The president, I think, had a different view on that. But, at the end of the day, the FCC acted as it was supposed to act, which is an independent regulatory agency. And I think it's a credit to the unanimous decision, bipartisan. It's a template of how this government could work. And I think when the Democrats and Republicans agree on things.
I'm glad you're here, Chris, and I hope you'll suggest to the president to make more Trump aides available for interviews on CNN.
Could we agree next week?
Let's get Kudlow on here.
Next week we do a program about all the president's economic successes. Could we do that?
We're a 24-hour channel.
I'll ask
Larry.
But I
just get 1 hour about the media.
If I could.
The only thing that I would say has changed about the Trump White House is how Trump is approaching the job, which is that last year, in 2017, when he was aware of being in over his head, I think, and every president, to be fair, comes in feeling that way. But
I would too.
But
I think anyone would.
But obviously, he ran not as a technocrat who had a lot of government experience. He was more easily swayed by advisors, more easily put in one direction or another. And now, sometime around the turn of the new year, you could feel really him feeling more emboldened, more understanding of what the job was, sort of some level of I've got this now. And that is what has changed, and that's not small.
Tell me if I'm wrong, but I sometimes get the impression that you're trying to say to viewers and readers, don't be surprised anymore. This is exactly what we would expect from Trump.
Right, which is not to say, I think that people draw the illogical conclusion from that what I'm saying is just accept this and be fine, because that is not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that constantly being surprised or saying to yourself, why would he do this? Or looking for some deeper motive behind everything. I mean, I'll give you for instance, he gave this interview to The Sun, the British tabloid, notorious British tabloid, during his UK swing last week or whenever that was. Now it feels
you
like
said
it
was
kind
of a favor to Rupert Murdoch.
It was a favor to Rupert Murdoch.
Friend.
That's what he told people. That's why he did it. And it was not because he had some pre-planned strategy about shaking things up.
Yeah, he wasn't trying to go in there
and global order. I mean, he was surprised at how his remarks were received. He didn't realize that he would be making the news that he did. He didn't realize it would have the impact that it did, being in the host country, talking about their politics. When he left the stage in Helsinki, he has said this publicly, what's the big deal? There's a lot of assuming that, I mean, Trump lies frequently, or tells falsehoods frequently, or stretches the truth frequently, but he also often tells the truth, which is, what's the big deal? I didn't understand what I did.
Right.
And so,
he said, I thought I did a great job at the press conference.
Correct. And sometimes he is actually just telling you why he did something.
The press briefings, I mean, there's only been a few of them in the past month. I counted 4 in the last 30 days. This does seem like a change, that they're happening even less often than they used to.
I think that they have become of questionable value for the administration. For us, they are valuable. They need to continue.
Even if she stonewalls the whole time?
I would rather be able to ask an official a question. I mean, I don't understand the people who tell us the press should go stand up and turn our backs or walk out en masse. What the press should do is what happened the other day where Jordan Fabian from The Hill tossed his question back to Hallie Jackson of NBC when Sarah tried to avoid her. I think that is very, very worthwhile. It is important that what Trump has benefited from for decades is dividing and conquering the media. He's exceptional at it.
You said at the end of the week this was the worst week of the Trump presidency. How do you convey that in stories and in TV segments? How do you try to tell people this is different?
Well, all you can do is actually just say it. Frankly, in stories, it's pretty hard to convey beyond quotes from elected officials, beyond covering the vote in Congress. But I think what will tell us the degree of difference on this is going to be whether his favorable ratings change with Republicans, not just with the electorate overall. I'm loath to predict that there's going to be a change. So all I can do is tell people this is different and then explain the ways and why in which that is. Whether that means they absorb it, whether that means it translates into something else, I have no idea. And that's not really our job anyway.
Right. You said on Twitter a few days ago you're taking a break from this site. You said with the exception of breaking news and posting your own stories, you're leaving the service because it's not really helping the discourse. What happened? I'm
leaving engagement of it. It is. I called it once online an anger video game, and it is. It's like it used to be, I think, a decent community space. I actually liked Twitter because I liked engaging with readers in a different way as a reporter, which we don't really get to.
Yeah.
But that started to have more net negatives than net positives. And I think that the biggest problem with Twitter, and I've had this problem with Twitter since 2012, is that everything is sort of shrunken down to the same size and looks the same. All outrages are the same. A complaint about your airline losing your luggage looks the same as a presidential statement. And I don't know that that's a great thing. So with newspapers and with cable news, you can tell by photos, story placement, duration of time spent on a story, how the outlet feels about that piece of news. Do they consider it important? Is it something they're giving prominent placement to? Twitter, literally everything is the same across the board. And part of the problem, too, candidly, is that, Donald Trump did make Twitter a place where people sort of had to go because he was using it as his main platform. He infuses the media with a level of power that no other president has. He treats us not just as the opposition party, but as equals, almost. And by doing that, he makes us the story. And I don't want to be the story. To some extent, we can't help it in this moment, but to the extent I can, just engaging constantly on Twitter was just not worth it.
I get the impression you just want to put new information into the world.
Correct.
That's the goal.
Yes, and I do look at Twitter because it is still a breaking news feed. I'm not off the site in the sense of I never look at it. I still have the app on my phone, and I would, because of the way that news works these days, I'd have a harder time knowing what's going on without it. But I don't want to be in it the same way. It's just not worth it.
And I hope the executives are listening. There is a value to be had in a conversation about how to improve the service.
They clearly see the value in how it runs currently, and
like a sewer.
And I think that there is a diminishing returns.
Yeah. Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey did respond to Haberman and to my comments over the weekend. You can hear the entire interview with Maggie on our Reliable Sources podcast. Hear more of her take. Download our podcast through Apple, TuneIn, or Stitcher.
The tabloid stunner that closed the week and is now, take a look here, the subject of front-page headlines across America. President, secret recording, payoff, and playmate are words one does not expect to find in the same sentence. But that is where we find ourselves this Sunday, and there are giant legal and political questions as a result. Your favorite president did nothing wrong was part of a presidential tweet Saturday, a tweet that made clear the president's anger at both his longtime lawyer, Michael Cohen, and the authorities who seized this and other recordings during a raid on Cohen's home and his office. Inconceivable is the term the president used for the raid and the brash Cohen decision to record him. Now, Cohen isn't talking, but his lawyer tweeted that it would be wrong to believe what the president is saying about this, ending the tweet with this taunt. Why so angry? Quick context, that recording was made at Trump Tower 2 months before the 2016 presidential election. Cohen, we are told, suggests paying Playboy model Karen McDougal to buy the rights to her story, which is that she had a months-long affair with then businessman Trump back in 2006. A source tells CNN the president asked Cohen how such an arrangement would work. The president in the past has denied the affair and denied any knowledge of payments to McDougal. And you start there. What has been said on the president's behalf about this in the past, some of it clearly not true. The question is, what is the legal jeopardy for Mr. Cohen and the president now?
Yeah, and that's one of the big questions going forward, whether or not any of this involves a violation of federal law, campaign finance law, perhaps anything even more significant, implicating the president, whether or not Michael Cohen is going to cooperate with federal authorities against the president, among other issues. Clearly, the president is concerned. Otherwise, he wouldn't have tweeted like he did yesterday, suggesting that Michael Cohen may have done something illegal, even though it's not illegal to record a conversation one way under New York law. But, you know, there's the legal side, and there's also the political side. The president in the campaign was dishonest and, frankly, lied to the American public about his relationship with Karen McDougal. Now we know from this tape recording, obviously, that it existed. They said there was no such relationship before. This comes the same way that they completely denied the Stormy Daniels situation. The president said he had no knowledge, knew nothing about this payment. Rudy Giuliani said, well, he did know about this payment. He was involved with it. So clearly there are a lot of questions at the White House.
And all happening at roughly the same time frame. The last couple of months of the presidential election, the payment to Stormy Daniels, the payment, the National Enquirer ended up making the payment. And this conversation was, should they essentially buy the rights away from the National Enquirer to silence her? I'm sorry, I interrupted.
When you do reporting in Trump world, you often find that people are perpetually concerned about Michael Cohen. He's Trump's New York lawyer, thought he was going to come in the White House. Early on, he was down in Washington some. White House aides and Chief of Staff Reince Priebus, others said, you know, this guy doesn't need to be in here all the time. I mean, he was the president's kind of bagman and fixer in New York. And the folks in Washington do not know what this guy knows, what documents he possessed, how many conversations he taped, how he behaved for decades, or at least 1 decade and more as the president's lawyer. And if you talk to people around the president, you often hear concern about Michael Cohen. And you can see from the president's tweet this weekend, he's now concerned about Michael Cohen. I mean, this is someone who, when Cohen has told associates that he doesn't feel the president's been loyal enough to him, he's complaining about his legal bills. He's not someone who's really in the president's corner anymore. When you have someone who is your top fixer, I think is the right word, who's no longer in your corner, it's not good for you.
Also, the whole point of a fixer, as I understood it, not having one myself, unfortunately, is that the fixer fixes things without the principal knowing. And that was certainly what we heard from some Republicans, some people around Trump, was that the president didn't necessarily know what Cohen was doing. This tape blows that up. He's speaking to him about this matter on a tape. So that really that blows up any sort of plausible deniability. The president knew what was going on. He was involved. And I think that's a big problem, especially considering, as you rightfully point out, nobody knows what other tapes exist, what they're about, or what's coming at all. But I would imagine that they're likely going to be conversations with the president. And that seems pretty problematic for the White House.
And the president is, I'm sorry, you want to?
You know, so this incident to me in isolation is difficult for me to get excited about or get into a lather about. It seems unsurprising to me. We knew during the campaign that the president was dishonest. We knew that he was a philanderer. We knew that he surrounded himself with people like Michael Cohen who did these sorts of things. The president's response also seems typical to me. It doesn't necessarily signal concern to me. It signals that he's thin-skinned, that this guy is getting under his skin. What strikes me is the possibility of what does this guy have on him in the future, and is there something bigger than this incident that exists? Because this, to me, doesn't seem like anything all that significant.
The question becomes, is there some either campaign finance or banking record violation in terms of how the money was moved around? That would be the question going forward. The president is mad. He's up in Bedminster, New Jersey at his resort for the weekend. You saw the tweets yesterday. He's also trying to change the subject, as he often does, tweeting about other things, including last night the rigged witch hunt. This morning he's at it again, but last night it was headed by the 13 angry Democrats. No collusion, no obstruction. The president going on there. It's interesting. You know, I know from conversations he's had with friends that he's mad at Michael Cohen. He's used some choice words in describing his longtime friend and fixer. He's trying to do this now again. But just for a little context, again, the president lashing out. He calls it the witch hunt. He calls it rigged. This is the president's own FBI director speaking publicly again this week, saying, sorry, boss, it's not the way I see it.
I do not believe Special Counsel Mueller is on a witch hunt. I think it's a professional investigation conducted by a man that I've known to be a straight shooter. In all my interactions with him, in my past life in government and certainly since then. So I don't think it's a witch hunt.
How does that play with the boss when these guys repeatedly get asked about this at a time where you see the stories in the newspaper again today, releasing of the documents in the Carter Page FISA warrant? The president says they show one thing. If you read the documents, they actually don't show what the president says they show at all. But you can sense a tension as we get more activity out of the special counsel's office, tension in the White House.
Well, the president's rhetoric on the investigation puts folks like Christopher Wray in a tough spot because he has, tens of thousands of agents and law enforcement officials that he's responsible for who obviously don't see it as a witch hunt. And the president, but he can't really publicly, sharply disagree with the president either because the president can fire him. I mean, there you saw him trying to walk the line without repudiating the president, but just saying, here's what I think the facts are, right? I mean, the president's messaging exercise on this probe, I think, is actually been pretty successful. He has lots of people convinced that it is a witch hunt. You've seen approval numbers go down for Special Counsel Robert Mueller's probe. There's been all sorts of incendiary charges, some of them not true, obviously, about this investigation. And then you have folks who are playing it out, Rod Rosenstein, Christopher Wray, obviously Bob Mueller, who are in a tough spot because he's a president of the United States. And when he tweets these sorts of things, it's hard to go against the guy who paid your check or who keeps you in office.
And the risk in doing that, too, of course, is that he does not put any pressure on Russia for allegedly, these Russians who were indicted for hacking and attacking the American elections. The president has still not called for their extradition. He still has not raised any concerns about what was found 8 days ago by these indictments. Instead, he's been continuing to attack this as a rigged witch hunt to suffice to help his own political purposes.
But as Josh points out, it is kind of smart PR because in the end, particularly if Democrats win the House, this is likely to be a political process. If Democrats win the House and they decide to pursue some kind of impeachment action, which is certainly what the grassroots of their base and the liberal wing of their base wants them to do, it becomes a political game in Washington. So laying out the president's narrative now is setting up for that moment. The thing is, there's been no counter narrative because the investigation, Robert Mueller has been a black box. So the question is, what happens once we start hearing from Mueller, once the investigation starts speaking? Then there's pushback to that narrative. And does the dynamics of that, do those polling numbers start to shift?
Are we having the same conversation at the end of September that we're having now as we watch what plays out in Mueller in the next few weeks? I think it's a big question.
Thousands of years deep under the sand, all peeled back to reveal this: an ancient Egyptian tomb and its eternal inhabitants. I'm Ben Wiedemann with you about 23 feet beneath the barren hills of Dara Abul Naga in southern Egypt. The journey begins at this unassuming doorway cut into the chalky rock. Egyptian archaeologists have just recently discovered this tomb. You and I are some of the first members of the public to see it. Ducking inside, you find the first chamber. Look closely. You can still make out hieroglyphs and paintings on the walls. In front of you, the first clue to discovering who was buried below. A statue. The figures are husband and wife. A plaque identifies the man as a goldsmith. They lived during the Middle Kingdom period in ancient Egypt, almost 3,500 years ago. Look to your right. That dark hole is where we're headed. Above you, 2 aluminum ladders stacked on top of each other and tied with a rope. When local workers arrived here, all of this was filled with sand. By hand, they painstakingly brushed it away. Among their discoveries, these 3 mummies. They may be the bodies of the goldsmith and his wife, or potentially later additions who reused the tomb. To your right, a man uses a syringe to inject glue into this wooden coffin. All around this area, these men found ushabtis, small statuettes meant to be servants in the afterlife. Now let's move to the coffin behind you. At only a few feet high, the ceiling means you have to stoop to move about. If you bump the ceiling, rock will crumble, a reminder of just how delicate this ancient place really is. There isn't much air either, and the heat, oppressive. But these men are used to it. Many of them come from generations of archaeological workers. They didn't go to university, but their skills, patience, and delicate touch are invaluable in this kind of work. These men aren't the first living souls to be here since ancient times. Grave robbers looted the tomb for precious objects. Here they cast aside bones as they worked. Still, the man on the left has just found a comb or brush buried here. It's a reminder that the work here is far from finished. Authorities are convinced they've only just scratched the surface here at Dara Abu Naga. For now, we at least will leave the dead in peace. I'm Ben Wiedemann in southern Egypt, and this is CNN in virtual reality.